That's what I'm talking about.
Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
Welcome to BS, Beyond Stereotypes, a podcast about lawyers using their authentic voices to change the world.
Stay creative. And, we live in maybe one of the greatest economies in the history of the world, certainly currently. And the opportunities we have here as U.S. citizens are incredible. And I think so often we get roped into thinking we've got to stay where we are, doing what we are. Even within your firm or your organization, you can evolve, transform yourself. So I would say challenge yourself to think creatively around your career, whether that means staying within your firm and doing something different for your organization, or looking outside to do something entirely different. Stay grounded in your values and make sure you understand that. But if you're not happy doing what you are, or you feel like you're capable of doing more, even if you're happy doing what you want and you're curious to explore something else, I'd say go do it. Aim higher and aim towards your happiness.
Welcome to BS, Beyond Stereotypes. I'm your host, Merle Vaughn. Here to BS with me today is Sashi Brown, whose story I find fascinating and who will no doubt inspire all of you to embrace your authenticity. Hey, Sashi.
Good morning, and thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it. I've been hoping we were going to pull this off for not quite a year now, and we were able to do it. And I know that football season is going to be starting up pretty soon. So you have a little respite. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, we're getting ready to head into our summer break, and then we'll be right back at it, chasing another Super Bowl here in Baltimore, and trying to beat up on probably some teams from some of the listeners' favorites. So hope to disappoint many of you, but thanks for listening and supporting.
Well, I'll tell people that Sashi is the president of the Baltimore Ravens. And before I say anything else, I will tell you that my husband, Jeff, is a diehard Washington, D.C. fan. He grew up in the area right around the corner from the stadium. And so he's diehard. But I think his second favorite team is probably the Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah, the good thing is husbands get better with time. So hopefully he'll wisen up and flip-flop that 1 and 2, and we'll get him in the purple and black.
That's right. That's great. I'll have to tell him that you said that. So yeah, Sashi,
we all need a little maturing.
Well, that's amazing. So Sashi, let me just tell the listeners a little bit about your trajectory. It looks like, from what I can tell, and when I finish, correct anything that I got wrong. It looks like you grew up in the Boston area, and then attended an HBCU called Hampton University. Another thing my husband had jokes about, but my sister-in-law attended Hampton. He went to Virginia State, so there's always some rivalry going on there.
Mm-hmm.
And then you attended Harvard Law. After graduating from Harvard Law, you were at a large law firm called I think it was called WilmerHale at the time, I'm not sure, and for about 3 years. And then left there and joined the Jacksonville Jaguars. After the Jacksonville Jaguars, you were at Monumental Basketball as the chief planning and ops officer, and then moved from there to the Baltimore Ravens. And there was a time in there, it looked like, for about 10 years, where you also had a jazz club. So I want to hear about all of that, but what did I leave out?
I think you got the broad brushes of it. I know the object of the podcast is to talk about me. So I'll indulge. That's not my favorite topic, as you can imagine. But yeah, I was born in Boston. My folks are from the Midwest and Mid-South, as my mom likes to point out. They lived only 75 miles away, but across the Ohio River in Frankfort, Lexington, Kentucky, my father. And my
Oh,
mom was born in Cincinnati, but they both, in that time period, which was the late 60s, found there were a lot more opportunities for folks of color on the coast,
mhm.
academic and professional. And so my mom went off to Boston U as a 17-year-old freshman, and my dad played a horn and was up between DC and New York and Boston, and they met actually back home in Cincinnati in one of the off season, I say off season in football mode here, but in one of her summer breaks
Uh-huh.
between academic semesters. And so they met and started dating, and several years later had me and my brother in the Boston area. So we were born there, but we grew up mostly in Middletown, Connecticut. My dad was getting his PhD at Wesleyan
Mhm.
University there. He was playing
Wow.
his horn and becoming an ethnomusicologist. They both became professors. And ultimately, around the start of high school, I moved back to the western suburbs of Boston and Framingham.
Mhm.
And then you got the rest. I went to Hampton, took a year off after school unintentionally. I was supposed to go work for the NBA. They went on strike the year I was supposed to start my job. So my job got canceled. And then went uh, went back to law school. That's 99 fall, and graduated in 2002 from Harvard Law School, and went down to Wilmer Cutler at the time in DC. Um, they merged with Hale and Dorr, so they became WilmerHale, the firm they are
Got it.
now.
Mhm.
And I went in house to the Jags, and then from the Jags to the Browns. That was one of the steps that you
Ah, I
missed, and spent
missed the
about five
Browns,
seasons.
sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Missed 5 years there with the Browns, and worked in both a legal capacity but also a football operations capacity. And then, yeah, went over to work with Ted Leonsis's group in DC and had a great time. Finally made it to the NBA, but had a great time working in a different league and learned a ton from working with Ted and his great team there. Really enjoyed my time working with him, and then was fortunate enough to get recruited away to the Ravens, ironically, by the senior partner I went to work with all those years ago when I first started my career as a young lawyer at Wilmer Cutler, Dick Katz,
Got it.
my
Okay.
predecessor here at the Ravens. And so I've been in this role for about 2.5 years, came February of 22, and enjoying every minute of it. And we'll enjoy it more if we can get over the hump and into the Super Bowl this year.
So quick question about that. If you're there when they win a Super Bowl, we're gonna put that in the universe that they'll win. Will you get a ring?
Yeah, so most organizations, and we are no different. We end up buying rings for all of the staff.
All the staff.
Yeah, yeah.
Nice. Well,
So
that's an incentive.
all our full time staff end up getting rings.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah,
Okay, well, we'll put it I guess I'd have to say the Washington first and then the Ravens, but we both know Washington's not gonna win the Super Bowl, so,
you never know. You never know. Hope springs eternal. And
yes.
this would be my second ring. I actually won a ring with the Washington Mystics WNBA when I was with Mighty Mill. So
Oh,
I've got a
wow.
nice one sitting at home, and had a fun time watching them on a great run, led by Mike Tebow and Elena Deladon and Ariel Atkins and a bunch of dynamic young women who killed it. So it was fun.
Wow. So, yes, so hopefully I will get back to that because there's so much going on in the WNBA right now. It's almost more interesting than the NBA, but, let's talk about you a little bit more. So what I like to ask if you're open to having this conversation is, and you've told us about your parents, and they sound like amazing. So there, there's no secret to me about why you would end up going to Harvard and go and be a lawyer with your parents' academic background. But who else helped you? Like when you were in high school, I don't know whether it was a really mixed environment, or whether you hung out, with mostly people of color. But how was that for you? Did you feel encouraged in school? Who encouraged you?
Um, it's interesting, right? Go back to the foundations where you kind of build your values in terms of
Right.
work ethic and your ambition and your whole trajectory. And a lot of that, as I mentioned, and I credit them all the time, is really prominently my parents.
Mhm.
I would also say growing up with an older brother and younger sister, we were a tribe, so it wasn't like I was isolated in my parents' vision for us and guidance and direction on the importance of academics and education. And for a long time, my grandfather also was a professor at
Wow.
Kentucky State and a chemist. And so education has been a hallmark for our family, and I hope to pass that on to my kids. It's got a transformative power. A lot of the work we do at the Ravens here, and probably no pillar more important of our community and philanthropic efforts is education. And so, not only do I carry it into my family and get passed down, but it also is something that we've aligned around here at the Ravens, and that predated me. But I would also, so my family unit for sure. Um, I don't think, to answer your specific questions, that there was anyone in particular that I thought of, um, as my kind of formative years in middle and high school. But certainly there were teachers that I remember, this and that. But we moved between um, Connecticut to Framingham when I was eighth and ninth grade. So,
Mhm.
I didn't have the same continuity in the school system there. One person in one experience I would call out was, I think in particular for me, I always found it disheartening, I would say, and a little awkward and misaligned that, I had a lot of different friends from a lot of backgrounds. Um, and I really treasured that. I also, as a young African American person whose parents were very conscious about instilling a sense of self
Mhm.
and history, as African American folks in this country, that a number of my friends were also African American. But as I would leave to my AP courses, we'd leave the cafeteria, so on and so forth. I'd go one way, and it seemed like all the kids of color would go another way.
Yep.
And that story is a very, very, very common one for particularly brown and black kids. And it's something that I hear a lot. The first place I heard it from a number of people was when I went to Hampton, which I didn't really anticipate as much. But going to an HBCU, and an HBCU is a fine educational institution as Hampton, it's just remarkable how many kids have that sense of like, hey, I'm trying to find my identity and my people, and I have. And then in an academic sense, I feel fairly isolated depending on the school you go to. Now, that's not everyone's experience, and certainly there's a lot, but getting to HBCU and all of a sudden being around a lot of kids who are significantly, at least to my perception, smarter than I was, more
Mhm.
organized, more ambitious. The diversity that you have even within HBC was fantastic for me to get around. And so I didn't, for those 4 years, it's the first time in my life I didn't think about my race, right?
Yep.
The color of my skin. And it was liberating in many senses, and inspiring in many senses, where, the leadership of the schools and the deans and academicians were folks of color. And you notice it at first, but very quickly you realize, or I shouldn't say you realize, very quickly the notion of a sense of that you were different than others, that you were an outcast, dissipates. And that, as I said, was really rewarding. There was a woman when I got to school that was a fantastic inspiration and driver. Her name was Dr. Freddie Davies. She ran the Honors College at Hampton, and I was fortunate enough to be rewarded a scholarship. And she co-opted a bunch of us that were young scholars into what was a budding honors college at Hampton. Her background was fantastic, and she was a dynamic person and dynamic educator. She had been one of the young teachers recruited, handpicked to educate the Little Rock Nine going into
Oh,
that school
wow.
to make sure that they were academically proficient enough, not only to survive, but to excel. And so she had a lifelong history at, I believe, Bennett and some other stops of making sure that she spent all her talents and energy and efforts to pull every ounce of talent and pushed, in some senses, every ounce of talent out of young, promising Black students. And she really awakened me and lit a spark underneath all of us, whether we wanted to or not. And it's phenomenal to see the number of students that have come out of that honors college at Hampton generally, but particularly at honors college. Just the level of success that so many of us have achieved personally and professionally is outstanding. So, I would credit to my family unit and my experience at Hampton in particular, Dr. Davy there, amongst many others, too many to name, but those were some real poignant inspiration points.
Wow. I mean, that's incredible. Little Rock Nine. I mean, that legacy is phenomenal and something to have participated in. I mean, that's I had never heard of that college, that honors college. So thanks for sharing that. I mean, I had a different experience. I grew up in Compton and I went to Dominguez High School, which you've probably heard of because a lot of athletes have come out of uh, famous athletes have come out of Dominguez, but it was an pretty much all Black experience. And then I went to USC, but all of my family went to HBCUs. So my mother went to Southern, my father went to Tuskegee. He also was a horn player. My sister went to Clark, and I was the only one who didn't go to an HBCU. And so that experience, coming from an all Black experience to a predominantly white experience, was very isolating. But we had a large group of Black folks at the time at USC, and we're all very tight to this day. What was it like for you to go from Hampton to Harvard? And how was that transition? And was it a difficult transition for you or not?
I did not find it difficult. I found, the law school experience difficult. Socially, I didn't. As I mentioned, my father and mother both. I'm fortunate that we lived in a part of the country and a part of the world where we had access to just an enormous amount of diversity, people from various religious and ethnic, socioeconomic backgrounds, and saw my parents value and cherish people from a lot of different backgrounds. And so, my best friend, almost to this day, is a Polish guy that of Polish descent, Joe Schuberth, and he teaches third grade in Pennsylvania, and we grew up since the day we were 3 or 4 years old playing baseball and going to kindergarten together, and have stayed together ever since.
Wow.
As friends. And so, I have a number of friends from a wide variety of backgrounds, and always honored that. And I think that it's important to get that experience at some point. So, for you coming from Dominguez or a homogenous high school experience, to duplicate that homogenous experience, I think at college doesn't really set you up well. And I had a
Right.
number of friends from some of the big predominantly Black schools and from some of the major cities. And, going to an HBCU and then they get out into the real world where, there's a lot more diversity in the workplace. And, that can be a little bit of a shock. For me, it wasn't. It was really, I grew up in, as I mentioned, even high school for me was predominantly white high school. And so, I believe I was well prepared and experienced dealing with a lot of different people, a lot of different backgrounds, and beyond just exposure, which I think is important,
Yep.
but also, real friendships and deep relationships with people from a variety of backgrounds. And that's something that my wife and I still cherish today.
Right. And I was gonna get to relationships. I That's one of the things I wrote down when you talked about how you got to the Baltimore Ravens. So I'll come back to that, hopefully. Um, but I want to talk about sports a little bit because clearly you're on a trajectory. That's something it seems clear that you were focused on being in the sports world. It looked like you played sports in high school. Not sure about, after high school. Was it something that was just important to you from when you were really small, or how did that happen?
Yeah, sports has always been, had a big hold on my heart and just been something that I've always enjoyed as a spectator, as a participant. I learned very early. My father and brother were 6'4". I'm 5'11". So I got the runt gene, and that didn't have my hopes of going to play in the NBA. But I also realized I just didn't have the talent very early, and my parents, emphasized certainly academics over athletics, although they supported both. But the passion for sports was always there. So when I went to college, I thought I wanted to be a sportscaster. I didn't really have a sense going into law school that I'd be able to reshape or shape a legal career into sports. But I ran into a few folks and learned a little bit about Dick Cass's practice at WilmerHale at a time in the early 2000s. There wasn't a lot of, you know, recognition of what sports and the law, the intersection of sports and the law, and what that could mean other than labor negotiations. And so I was fortunate at the right time to be able to combine times throughout my career, be able to combine my passion for sports with academic and professional endeavors. And, being able to go to a law firm that had a niche sports practice was great. And that's how I launched professionally as a young lawyer into it. But no doubt, my days growing up trying to figure out how to, be an NBA point guard, or how to be, to your husband will know this name, Daryl Green, who was my favorite
Yeah.
NFL player growing up. Um, those were very inspiring moments, and I still have a huge passion for a lot of sports, and primarily football, but watch a lot of soccer. Watch the Celtics win the NBA championship last night. So yeah, absolutely, sports has been a huge passion.
And so relationships, because I think one of the things that is important that you just said, that there are two things. One is that you found out that there was a law firm that had a niche in sports. Um, and that's something that I think young people who are listening, who may be at law firms and have some idea of what they think they want to do, but just don't know how to get there, is something to think about. There are law firms out there that have a niche in just about anything you might wanna do, whether it's fashion or sports or whatever. It's just, but most of us, I certainly, didn't I wasn't that savvy to really think about, "Oh, I love fashion. Let me go find a fashion law firm."
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and so I think that that's something that you brought up that was smart on your part. I don't know if it was intentional, but it was smart. But the other thing is you formed a relationship with Dick Cass early on, and then several years later, he came to you with this once in a lifetime opportunity, really. And, how important is relationships or are relationships, over time? How important have they been to your trajectory in sports?
I think they are the undercurrent of our economy at large. Not to make it too academic and philosophical, but I think so much happens based on relationships. Even in the work that we do here at the Ravens, we spend so much time on our relationships with our corporate partners, with our civic partners in Maryland and Baltimore here, and in Baltimore County. We spend a lot of time on that. I'm a huge, huge believer in the power of relationships. I would say a few things. One, just to go back for lawyers generally listening and young lawyers. I was laughing. I was out spending some time with a lawyer from Marriott the other day, longtime lawyer
Mhm.
now in business strategy for Marriott. He was just remarking that he tells young folks not to go to law school unless they really know a specific practice of law that they want to go into, or a career job that they got some familiar with, that they think they'll be happy with, because so many people, we are educating people at such a high clip and at such a high cost. So many people are going back and racking up tons of debt.
Yep.
Law schools are taking them in. And I think even coming from a prominent law school like Harvard, where the professional opportunities are probably greater than most, not to sound obnoxious, just being realistic about it. Um, Even there, the significant majority of my classmates went on to do something other than practice law, which is great in terms of the versatility, but it's also because they weren't happy with the form in which most law is practiced. And so I consider myself, you mentioned smart. I would say I think I was just fortunate that I had jumped into law school and done a couple of years and thought I'd go one direction and end up going back a different direction, and kind of figured it out as I went. So I was fortunate to find that actually this passion I had around sports manifested in some way in law, and to go and I want to take a shot at Dick, because I'll never let him live this down. I went to the firm, and I had read up about this partner, Dick Cass, who's gained a lot of prominence and recognition as an outstanding practitioner. And Dick didn't even bother to interview me. I said, I'm not going to get to meet Mr. Cass, and I always tease him about that. But I did make it back to Wilmer Cutler as a young lawyer, and he gave me a number of great assignments and certainly brought me up. But he's been a tremendous inspiration, and Dick's very stately, wise, understated guy. But I watched him from afar and was able to work with him for some young years and watch him on transactions and remember him. And then I think, hopefully, Dick says this, but when he went to do some background on me and diligence me as a potential candidate to succeed him, one of the things that he mentioned was that he couldn't find anyone that would say anything bad about me. And I
Mhm.
always remembered that. It just struck me that even places, um, I think people who know my background know I was in Cleveland and we were trying to rebuild the team. And, I was fired from the Browns, but even, in some of the places I had been, um, that the departure wasn't as planned, and plans didn't go as we forecasted, that even in some of those places that people had positive things to say. So I think keeping the long term in mind, understanding that not coming into any situation with a sense of entitlement, which I know every generation beats up on the generation or two behind them.
Right.
But really coming into organizations open to working hard, being a great partner in organizations and relationships, being a great partner, listening, finding flexibility and the ability to compromise, and then doing great work alongside and with and for people. has always been kind of a hallmark, and having fun while you do it, being someone who's
Right.
enjoyable to work with, work across from, to the extent that you can. And there's tough conversations you have to have with colleagues and um, husbands, as you know, we were teasing earlier, and kids, but always coming back to that foundation of good spirit and well intentioned for other people. I think it's been a hallmark, and for me, in terms of building those relationships. Doesn't mean that you're soft in everything that you do, but it means that you're respectful of the other side and conscientiously and intentionally trying to build good relationships.
That's awesome, and I laughed when you said tough relationships and husbands because there's this show, which I know you're familiar with, called Hard Knocks, um, and my husband watches it all the time, and when it's time for them to let people go, he always calls me, he says, "Merle, come down, here's your favorite part," and and I go down, and he started doing that because as he would watch them, he said to me, "Merle, you could do this job. You'd be so good at it." And I
Mhm.
would. That part where they let people go,
Mhm.
cut somebody from the team, but they do it in a way that the person being cut is okay. I mean, it seems like it's usually kind of with compassion. I don't know if that's in empathy. I don't know if that's just on the show, but I could rip that Band-Aid off and have people, thanking me. And I used to do that at a company that I own. Is that how it kinda goes? I know you're on the operation you're on the personnel side at one point. How hard is that to do? And, is it that they just expect it, or what's that like?
Yeah, I have to think really hard about, some of the professional experiences that I've liked less than those days. Those cut down days are really difficult, and
Uh-huh.
you know, Hard Knocks gets edited, but there's some tough conversations you think about for guys that have worked so hard, and all the insecurity that comes, even being an elite professional athlete at one of the greatest sports in the world in terms of the athleticism of it and competition of it. To be told that you weren't good enough is
Right.
a harsh reality for a lot of these guys, and so that's tough. And we develop close relationships, particularly here at the Ravens, where we are so familial and really care about everybody here. That's tough. To sit down with dozens of young men on the same day and deliver the news that they don't want to hear. Now they understand the reality of it, but it's still personal. And
Mhm.
so I think teams have done a better job over time. But you have some, you know, every organization, every individual does it differently. And, I've always tried to handle that with a lot of compassion. And Coach Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta, my peers here and colleagues, do that particularly well. And we always try to have compassion and maintain the relationship even after the player's not here. But it's not fun at all. Tough
Yeah,
days.
I know it wouldn't be fun, but I think that there are people who are better at it and can do it, um, in a way that it's just not harsh, and I would think that that would have something to do with the culture of the firm as well of the
Of the
team as
team. Yeah.
well. Yeah, yeah, and it seems like from what I heard and, what I hear, vicariously through my husband, that the Baltimore Ravens have always had an amazing culture. I know that Ozzie Newsome, was one of the first Black general managers, right? A and I don't know how many have come, since him, but it sounds like, the Baltimore Ravens have always kind of been ahead of the curve in terms of culture and diversity and, um, uh, inclusion. It Am I getting that right, or is that something I'm making up?
No, Oz, no doubt, whose office is a couple steps down the hall. I'm not sure if he's in there right now, but has been an inspiration to so many of us. And he was the first Black GM in the modern NFL as we know it, and has seeded a number of others around. In fact, one of my early mentors was a disciple of Ozzy, Shaq Harris, who was with me when I was a young lawyer in Jacksonville, and looks out for me still today. So yeah, absolutely. I think the Ravens very intentionally, we really pride ourselves on having a great culture. It's really important by design. NFL teams are positioned to face an extraordinary amount of competition and adversity. And so if you don't have your culture where it needs to be, which is one of the things I was trying to fix when I was in Cleveland, you really just fracture under that pressure and that adversity. And the Ravens have been so consistent over time because of their resilience and the strength of their culture. And culture can mean a lot of different things as it relates to diversity. Oz happens to be Black. He's also just a great general manager and leader. And he has set the tone here in Baltimore and predated even here, right? So he came when the Ravens came from Cleveland. Oz was here, and he set the foundation for how things are done with the humility and his leadership and a familial way that he dealt with people and a tremendous amount of respect. He's a great, great gentleman and wise beyond his years, and developed a lot of young, talented people here and selected a lot of young, talented players. And so, we've enjoyed an extraordinary and almost unprecedented amount of success here in Baltimore. We want to continue winning championships here, but we will keep our eye on the ball. That is, a strong culture, and do everything we can on a daily basis to continue nurturing that culture.
Awesome. So speaking of that culture, it's the Rooney Rule was instituted, years ago, maybe even before you came to the sport, to professionally. And it's controversial. The law firms adopted something similar called the Mansfield Rule that was based on the Rooney Rule, and that has, it's been fairly successful. But in these times where, it seems like anything related to diversity and inclusion, is under attack. Is the Rooney Rule something that one you feel has had a positive effect and been successful at all? And two, do you think it's something that will be sustained, or will it morph into something else, or will it go away altogether?
I think it has evolved. I think it will continue to evolve because it needs to. And I think it's a positive in a couple senses. One is that I think it's at its outset, it is an affirmative public step to address something that was not being done at the level it needed to be done, which was put diverse candidates in positions of leadership in the coaching ranks. And so I always applaud before you even get to results. I'm a big believer, and we were really looking at kind of people's processes that lead to the results. And so I think the notion that the league would publicly acknowledge its challenges, its issues, and then put in place a policy, a process, and a potential solution, I think is noteworthy, especially in this day and age where so many people want to kind of run and hide from it. So I applaud the league. And, listen, I think a big part of this was also a number of early coaches, personnel, staff of color who advocated and pressed on the league to get them to that point and stated their case, but also a league that was receptive enough to it over time to enact an actual rule. And certainly the Rooney family, who it's named after, was a big part of that. So that's the first thing I said about it. In terms of results, you can argue kind of one way or the other. My sense is, there's a lot more work to be done around head coaching ranks and offensive coordinator ranks, certainly at the college level, certainly at the professional level. We've had some progress. We have had some challenges at the NFL. The good thing it's probably there's been no more effort and focus on this now, and this work is being led at the league by a young sister, Dacia Smith, and also Troy Vincent, but also Roger Goodell. And so it's a topic of conversation openly, and a lot of data, transparently shared with teams. And the process has become more robust. And so it continues to evolve. And, it wasn't something like we see a lot of nowadays where a lot of companies post George Floyd, we're really about DE&I, and those same companies are, on the opposite end of that spectrum today, and individuals. Right. So, I applaud the league for sticking with it over, decades now and continuing to be serious about it. We all like to see the results in terms of more folks of Asian Pacific Islander, certainly Latino, Chicano descent, African American, and female and LGBTQ folks get opportunities across the board, both in sports and outside. We've got a lot of work to do as a society, and certainly this is a very poignant moment for DEI initiatives as they became post George Floyd, all the rave, right, across society at large. And I think in time, as most things ebb and flow, we'll see who's really committed.
Yes, and unfortunately, it's been politicized, and politics has been weaponized. I one of my friends is David Kelly, and he's the GC of the Golden State Warriors, and I interviewed him early on when I started the podcast. And one of the things we talked about was the difference about how the NBA versus the NFL has been able, how they handle these issues versus the NFL. And at the time, it was all about kneeling. Nobody really talks about that anymore, but it's still kind of the elephant in the room. And David said, he thinks that because there aren't as many players, and for whatever reason, they've been able to be more intentional about those issues. I mean, what do you think the difference is between how these things wash out in the NBA and the NFL?
I haven't thought a lot about them in relative terms because I'm not sure it's particularly helpful to think about them in relative terms, other than to learn, what's working in one league and isn't. I think one of the things that you've seen, you've seen a lot of success, Art Shell and others, in the NFL, Mike Tomlin, Lenny Wilkins years back, and even Bill Russell was a coach as he was playing and winning championships and all those different things. So I think, the big challenge on the face of the lack of particularly Black faces in leadership positions in both leagues has been there have been so many players that understood the game at a certain level, and you would just think that would manifest itself into more great coaches, right? And both leagues have challenges. Trust me, I was in both leagues, and that's been a privilege of mine in my career. But both leagues have significant challenges in terms of giving opportunities to new folks. And listen, that's also because you have a lot of coaches that just get recycled. A lot of the
Yes.
coaches on the sidelines are the same faces, and that inhibits everyone from opportunities. But a lot of times that experience is very valuable, and it's something that ownership groups are reticent to not have in selecting a coach. There's a safety, a whoopee effect, so to speak, to having someone who's done it before. And so, I think that the challenges there are making sure that, to me, in both leagues, frankly, do you really understand at an ownership level what success looks like and what you're aiming for in a coach, and we spend a lot of time on that. I've spent a lot of time on that over the course of my career. And then do you have the patience to understand through in such a competitive environment that when your results aren't what you want them in the short term, does that mean you have the long-term misalignment with your coach?
Hmm.
And you've seen a lot of examples of I think coaches, and particularly this has been a thorn in the side, is that when folks of color, women, look at MLB and the Marlins, have an opportunity to finally break through, are they given the same
Hmm.
rope, right? Are they
Yes.
allowed to, do ownership groups have the same patience with them? And so, that's been a topic, and I think a common theme between the two leagues. The other thing I'd say is I think the the jobs are very different. Even the head coaching jobs are very different in both leagues. And so there's a lot of takeaways that I would have, but a lot of work to be done. I definitely think, one of the hallmarks of the Ravens' success is that um, our ownership group, Steve and Renee Bisciotti, Steve has hired really talented people and gotten out of the way and supported them through thick and thin. And the thin
Hmm.
comes in waves. And so you better
Yeah.
have real commitment to your value set and to your people, as opposed to changing, every couple of years and restarting. That's a recipe for failure. And so, having given Ozzie and John Harbaugh and Brian Billick before him, Eric DeCosta now as a GM, the support and commitment to make tough decisions and to understand that the results we want won't always be the results we achieve has, I think, boded us well. And, there's not a lot of GMs that have had the type of support, Black GMs that have had the type of support that Ozzie had, here, or walked into the same type of organization with the same type of, ownership commitment. And frankly, what I would say is kind of organizational wisdom in terms of how to
Hmm.
run these organizations. So there's a ton of turnover, very high profile. Um, but ironically, you look at Wall Street, there's 7 or 8 Black CEOs of the Fortune 500.
Yep.
So, as a percentage, the leagues are probably doing better than society at large. But because we have such a high profile, and listen, I'm not saying we're doing as well as we should be doing, but because there's a high profile, there's a lot of focus on it. And again, because the league, I think, put itself out there with the Rooney Rule to its credit, there's a lot of focus on it. But across society, as you said, a lot of room for improvement.
Right. Well, and a few things there, in law firms, Black partners of color are no more than 7%. Black partners are 4% in the AmLaw, 200, 100, 200. So law firms, have a lot to learn as well. But when what you just talked about reminds me of a stand-up bit that Chris Rock does, and where he basically says, we, because it's entertainment, it's everywhere, it's across the board in society, as you just said. And he says, we know we will have arrived when we have the opportunity to fail and still have another, another chance. He talks about entertainers who do a movie, and it doesn't do well, and never get another movie. But non people of color will do a movie, it doesn't do well, they still get another movie, and that's the challenge. It really, for me, is really not about affirmative action or any of those buzzwords. It's about equity. It's really, about getting to the point where everybody has the same opportunity and has the same expectations and has this, the same, runway, um, to be able to succeed and fail.
Yeah, and I think that's right. And as I mentioned before, pride myself on not having a homogenous group of friends and colleagues and so on and so forth. And as I coach young folks, but also share with my teams and talk with my peers, the big thing is to show up ready to do great work. And I am commonly contacted because I'm a Black president,
Uh-huh.
but not nearly as much because I'm a president of an NFL team. And some of that's because there's a lot of flavor and desire to talk through issues of race, particularly in the current political climate. But as I said, in terms of my experience at Hampton, I relish the day and the opportunities I have where I walk in rooms and I'm not seen first and foremost for the color of my skin, but hopefully because the fantastic stadium renovations or other strategic plans that we put in place and general kind of leadership that everybody wants to be um, judged based on the work that they do as
Yes.
opposed to some other reasons. And you can understand human nature, that there's always going to be a backlash to the extent that folks feel that someone's getting an opportunity for them,
Took
um,
their spot.
for the color of their skin. Having said that,
Right.
you look at the history in terms of what's there. It's tough. So it's just something that we're going to have to work through in sports, but elsewhere. And there's some extremely, extremely talented people that work in this league at the coaching and other ranks, and we're all privileged to be part of it. And we've got a lot of work to do to make sure that the opportunities. And as I said, I had a stop at one of my earlier positions prior to coming to Baltimore, and we hired a unbelievably talented young crew of seasonal employees.
Mhm.
University of Chicago, Princeton, Howard, different places like that. I threw Howard in there. It's actually not accurate, but Harvard and a couple other places, really strong academic backgrounds.
Mhm, mhm,
But the group was all male and it
mm.
was all white. And I went back and I said, this is a great group to bring in. We need to do the same thing next year in terms of the quality of folks, and not that everybody has to be from the Ivy League, because there's a lot of talent that comes from everywhere. I want the same quality of people, character and academic capability and intellectual prowess, but I want to make sure that there's um, heavily integrated women and folks of color into that group. And they did. And they went out and
Nice.
found it. A number of those folks have had a tremendous amount of success. So I view diversity and inclusive practices as one is what you're really saying is, as I told people when we had this group, I said, we can't be the best organization if we're all male,
Right.
because the talent does not live in the male gene. And so all we're doing is cutting off 50% of the talent in the world if we show up with an all male team. And likewise, the same thing for people of color that don't have the same opportunities. And it doesn't mean that group that was assembled was not talented and very capable. We just needed to broaden the aperture and kind of scope of what we're looking for. Let me go back to a fun thing before we wrap up here, because I know we're getting
Yeah.
close. I hope you guys unearthed in your podcast with David Kelly his
He's a
emceeing and rapping skills.
rapping. Oh, he rapped. He freestyled for us. Yes, absolutely.
David and I have never met, but I grew up and am still a hip hop junkie. And so I listened to a great deal of what I would call more progressive uh, hip hop as a young man, and knew David, didn't know David, but knew David's group and a big fan. So if you guys get a chance, go listen to some of the stuff, All Natural. It's very entertaining, musical, and delightful. So I heard that connection earlier and meant to circle back to it.
Yeah, what's interesting is, they actually just started the Golden State Warriors. Uh David talked them into doing a production company or something like, where they're producing music now. So he's living his best life for sure.
Well,
Absolutely.
that's great. That's great. And a lot of those foundations you talk about it, but you know, bring aspects of yourself to your work and aspects of your background. And one of the things that we're really proud of here at the Ravens is we just launched a $50 million college access program here in Baltimore that's going to touch thousands of young kids in the Baltimore public school system and support them
Wow.
going from effectively anywhere from as early, and we're supporting several different programs that we have familiarity with. But anywhere from fifth, sixth grade all the way up through and beyond college to get them into
Hmm.
careers. And so those are some of the things in terms of inclusion, equity that we're able to do with this profile and platform that are so strong and make the job so rewarding. In addition, of course, to beating up on the Steelers and your husband's Commanders.
Is that the Blackbird Labs or is that something
No,
else?
that's different. Blackbird is separate. I'm on the advisory board there. That is an initiative basically to capitalize on a lot of the assets that are here in the Baltimore region and this mid-Atlantic region between Hopkins and College Park and UMBC, and some of the other academic institutions, plus a lot of the federal dollars that flow through here in terms of biotech. And so we've got a lot of highly talented um, researchers and professors that do work here, and we want to keep a lot of that technology, a lot of those commercial opportunities in Baltimore, and ultimately those jobs here in Baltimore. And so we've got $100 million initiative from the Bishotti family, and
Yeah.
in conjunction with several of the academic institutions here, to invest in technologies and support technologies to bring them to fruition and hopefully commercialization. So it's a fascinating opportunity that we have here in Baltimore with a tremendous amount of access, and we think we'll build an equal, if not better, version of some of the tech hubs and biotech hubs that have popped up around the country in different places like Boston and San Francisco and others.
Amazing. So, and just quickly before we wrap up, please give Steve Bisciotti my best because I work for MLA, which is owned by Allegis, and he was one of the founders of this amazing company. So, I'm thankful to him for that. And also talking about Baltimore and what you guys are doing. I mean, most people only relate to Baltimore based on The Wire, right? And so that's what you're talking about doing is a very different culture and identity for what probably most people think of when they think of Baltimore. So I commend that. As we wrap up, I have two questions for you. One, which we didn't really get to talk about, is what do you do for fun? Um, and then the last thing I'd like for you to talk about is to give our listeners just some wisdom, just some uh just encouragement about, because you had this amazing trajectory. You're awfully young to be doing, I think, to be doing what you're doing, and it's very impressive. So encouragement to do that, but also first tell us what you do for fun.
Sure. I don't have a ton of spare time, but in my spare time, because we got Paige and I have 4 kids, so I spend a lot of
Mm,
time with them, and I find a lot of fun in just interfacing with them, watch them grow, and I get yelled at for some of my errant throws at playing quarterback for my sons, or
mm.
what have you. But I spent a ton of time with my sons and 2 sons and 2 daughters, and that's a lot of fun. I've gotten into golf later in life, but I still like
Oh,
to be active. Riding my bike and doing the things. Love the water and swimming. There's nothing. I shouldn't say this because Paige would probably listen to this at some point, but love my weekends with my boys that I went to Hampton with and others that I grew up with. So there's a group of about 20 guys. Any subset of that can assemble for some golf and shenanigans once or twice a year. We'll go on
okay.
vacation together. That's always great. And we have always loved, and we now are fortunate enough to have the ability to travel. So we spent 2 of the last 3 summers in Greece, went to France a bit ago. Look
Nice.
forward to getting over to Senegal and Dakar and Morocco and some of the places in Africa that I'd love to travel to. As far as wisdom, one thing I'd say to people is travel and go out.
Mhm.
The other thing I'd say is just um, stay creative. And, we live in maybe one of the greatest economies in the history of the world, certainly currently. And the opportunities we have here as US citizens are incredible. And I think so often we get roped into thinking we've got to stay where we are, stay
Yep.
doing what we are. Even within your firm or your organization, you can evolve, transform yourself. So I would say challenge yourself to think creatively around your career, whether that means staying within your firm and doing something different for your organization, or looking outside to do something entirely different. Stay grounded in your values and make sure you understand that. But if you're not happy doing what you are, or you feel like you're capable of doing more, even if you're happy doing what you want and you're curious to explore something else, I'd say go do it. Aim higher and aim towards your happiness.
Right. Yeah. That's my motto. Finding joy is what I think people should be doing, and I agree with that 100%. And just on the golf tip, I actually am a pretty good golfer, and
Uh-oh.
yeah, so we'll have to play one day. But I actually got hit by a ball the other day on the golf
Oh my
course.
goodness.
I know, and so my advice to everybody is, if you're on a golf course, first of all, heads up. But secondly, please call 4. If you if you hit an errant ball, please shout out, because I got very lucky last weekend. Um, but Sashi, thank you so much for being here to BS with me today. I really appreciate it. I know you're really busy, and this took out an hour of your time, but it's well appreciated.
Well, good. I enjoyed the time. Thanks for having me, and enjoy your summer break. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks. You too. And thanks to everyone for listening. And until the next episode, remember that everybody is different, and different is good.
Hit it! That's what I'm talking about. Wait! Okay, now, from the beginning.
We hope you enjoyed the stories shared in today's episode of BS, Beyond Stereotypes. Join us next time when another authentic personality unleashes their uniqueness on the world.